All right, so get ready, because today we're diving deep into some pretty hardcore medieval philosophy.
Yeah, we're talking
We're
hardcore.
going to be looking at William Penbygull,
Oh, yeah, William Penn.
Oxford scholar,
Yeah.
from the late 1300s and early 1400s.
Yeah.
And Penbygull was really struggling with some big questions
Oh, yeah.
about identity.
Yeah, big questions about identity.
And not just like, you know, who am I identity, but really like the nature of how things exist.
Yeah.
And how can we even say that something is something else?
Right. How do we even talk about things?
That's kind of what we're looking at today.
Yeah, like how do we even use language to describe the world?
And what I think is so fascinating about Penbygull
Yeah.
is that he wasn't just like coming up with these ideas on his own.
Right.
He was really heavily influenced by John Wycliffe.
Oh, yeah, huge Wycliffe fan, like
Yes.
super, super into Wycliffe.
For those who don't know, Wycliffe was this philosopher and theologian
Right, very
who
influential.
really shook things up back then.
Oh, big time.
So to understand Penbygull, we need to understand this kind of key context
Yeah, got to get the background.
of the medieval philosophical scene.
It's like setting the stage, you know?
So can you kind of paint the picture for us?
Yeah. So,
What were the big debates happening in philosophy at that time?
well, one of the big
I
ones.
mean, what was going on?
Well, you have to remember, this is the medieval period.
Right.
You know, we're talking like centuries ago.
Yeah.
And one of the hottest debates was between the realists and the nominalists.
Okay.
And they were like going at it.
Realists versus nominalists.
Oh, yeah.
I love it.
Big showdown.
So who are the realists and who are the nominalists?
Okay, so basically they were fighting about universals.
Okay.
Now, when we say universals, we're talking about concepts
Okay.
like humanity,
Right.
redness,
Justice.
yeah, justice, these big ideas.
Okay.
And the realists, they believed that these universals
Right.
had real existence out there in the world.
Like these are real things.
Real things, man. Not just words,
Got
but
it.
the nominalists.
Okay.
They thought they were just names.
So just like labels,
The convenient label.
we slap onto stuff.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
I know, right?
So it's like, is humanity like a real thing?
Right.
Or is it just a word that we use to group a bunch of individuals together?
That's the question.
It seems like a pretty fundamental disagreement.
It's a big one.
Yeah. Like, how do we even...
Like, what is reality, man?
Yeah, what are we even talking about?
Huge implications.
All right, so we've got this big debate going on,
Right. Realists versus nominalists.
and Wycliffe is coming into this.
Yeah, Wycliffe's stepping into the ring.
He's a realist,
Big time realist.
and he's got a very interesting take on it.
Oh, yeah, this is where it gets good.
Lay it on me.
So Wycliffe argues that universals and the individual things they apply to
Right.
are actually really the same,
Really the same.
but formally distinct.
Okay, now hold on. Break that down for me.
All right, so picture this.
Okay.
You've got Socrates,
Well,
the dude, the individual,
Right.
and then you've got the universal humanity.
Right.
Wycliffe saying they're made of the same basic stuff,
Oh, okay.
but their form,
Their form.
yeah, like how that stuff is organized
Okay.
and what it means, that's what sets them apart.
So, like, the essence of what it is the same,
Got it?
but how that essence is formed
Right, how it's manifested
is different.
makes it distinct.
I think I'm following so far.
Good, good.
But this is where my brain starts to, like, twist a little bit.
Right, hit me.
If they're essentially the same,
Right.
how do we explain predication?
Classification, yeah.
You know, how we say things about things.
Like how we describe the world.
Exactly.
Right.
Like, we could say Socrates is white,
Sure.
but it would sound pretty weird to say humanity is white.
Yeah, that's getting a little strange.
So how
You've hit on it.
does that work?
That's the problem with Wycliffe's theory.
Okay.
It creates a real puzzle when it comes to predication.
So if Socrates and humanity are fundamentally the same,
Right.
why can we say certain things about one,
Right.
but not the other?
Exactly.
And this is where Penbygull steps in.
Penbygull to the rescue.
And he offers what I think is a really clever solution.
Oh, yeah, he's got some ideas.
He introduces this idea of predication by essence.
Predication by essence. Yeah, that's Penbygull's jam.
Okay, predication by essence.
Yeah.
I'm all ears. How does that solve the problem?
Okay, so basically, think of it like this.
Okay.
Predication by essence allows for properties to be indirectly inherited.
Okay.
So while whiteness might not be directly a part of the universal humanity,
Right.
it can still be predicated of humanity
Okay.
through individuals that have
Mhm.
both.
Okay.
Like our friend Socrates,
Yeah.
who happens to be both human and white.
Okay, so like
So there's this link.
This link, this
shared essence
shared essence.
that lets us make these indirect connections.
That's pretty clever.
It is, right?
Yeah.
Penbygull's a smart guy.
It's like a workaround almost.
Yeah, kinda.
But Penbygull didn't stop there.
Oh no, he keeps going.
He realized that this whole issue of predication
Yeah.
was deeply tied to the concept of identity.
Right, it all comes back to identity.
If predication depends on things being in some way identical,
Yeah.
how could the standard definition of identity work?
Right, the standard definition being...
Things being identical if they share all the same properties.
Exactly.
How can that work with Wycliffe's view
Yeah,
that universals and individuals are both the same and different?
that's the head scratcher.
Yeah, that does sound like a philosophical head scratcher.
Big time.
So how did Penbygull untangle that knot?
Ooh, good question. He did something really radical. He redefined identity itself.
What?
Yeah, Penbygull said identity isn't this all or nothing thing.
Okay.
Instead, there are degrees.
The degrees of
Wow.
identity and distinction. Okay, so instead of a simple like
Yeah,
yes or no
right.
to the question,
Like, are these things identical?
are these things identical?
Exactly.
Penbygull is suggesting a whole
Spectrum of identity.
like a sliding scale.
Yeah. Okay. I kind of like that. Yeah, it's a cool idea. So think about Socrates and humanity again.
Right. Back to our buddies.
They share properties like animality.
Right.
They're both living beings.
They're alive,
They
but
have
obviously.
their differences too.
For sure.
Only Socrates is named Socrates.
Right, exactly.
So they're partially identical,
Partially identical.
which allows for that predication by essence to work.
That's how it all fits together.
Pretty ingenious.
Penbygull was onto something.
You know, thinking back to the source material,
Yeah.
it seems like Penbygull didn't just stop with redefining identity.
No, he kept going.
He also went on to develop his own take on those different types of predication, right?
Oh, yeah. He gets into the nitty-gritty of predication.
So
Remember how Wycliffe had those three types of...
formal, yeah.
By essence and habitudinal.
That's right.
So Penbygull,
Yeah.
he keeps predication by essence, which
Oh.
we've already talked about,
The big one.
but he replaces habitudinal with causal predication
Right. Cause and effect.
and with informal predication.
He gets even more specific.
Okay?
He introduces another distinction.
Right.
Formal essential
Formal essential.
and formal accidental predication.
So we got two new kinds.
Yeah, it's getting complex.
All right, so causal predication.
That one's pretty
It
straightforward.
seems pretty straightforward.
Cause and effect.
Relationships.
Exactly. One thing leads to another.
But what's the difference between these two types of formal predication?
Okay, so formal essential predication
Right.
refers to those properties
Yeah.
that are absolutely necessary for something to be what it is.
Like the core of what makes something that thing.
Yeah, you could think of it as the classic
Like Aristotelian.
Aristotelian definition of essence.
Right.
For example, being a rational animal is essential to being human. You take away rationality,
Right.
you don't have a human anymore.
Okay, so formal accidental predication.
Now we're talking about the non-essentials.
So that must be like about those properties that aren't essential,
Right, the things that can change
that can change.
without altering the fundamental nature of something.
Okay, so give me an example.
All right, so Socrates,
Our good friend Socrates.
he can be white or tan,
Uh-huh.
short or tall,
Doesn't matter.
in Athens or in prison.
Still Socrates.
They're still Socrates.
Those are accidental properties.
Exactly.
But here's where it gets really interesting for me.
All right, let's hear it.
Penbygull says that even these formal predications,
Yeah.
both essential and accidental,
Uh-huh.
are ultimately types of predication by essence.
It all comes back to essence.
How does that work?
It's a bit of a mind bender.
It seems a bit counterintuitive.
I know, right?
If it's accidental, how can it be by essence?
Well, that's where Penbygull's redefinition of identity comes back in. Remember, he believes in degrees of identity.
Right, that spectrum.
So even something as fundamental as humanity
Yeah.
shares some, but not all, of
Okay.
its essence with individual humans like Socrates.
So it's like even essential properties are, in a way, indirectly inherited
Through this shared essence, yeah.
through this shared essence.
That's Penbygull's big insight.
Okay, so it's not like
A clean break
Mhm.
between universals and individuals.
it's all connected.
It's a spectrum, man.
This is really blowing my mind.
It's pretty wild, right?
I'm starting to see how Penbygull's ideas really challenge these traditional
Yeah.
black and white categories
The boxes we try to put things in.
that we often impose on the world.
Penbygull's breaking down those boxes.
But I have to admit,
What's that?
I'm still a little fuzzy
Okay.
on this distinction he makes
Yeah.
within formal accidental predication.
All right. Which one?
Secundum modum
Okay. Secundum modum.
and secundum habitudinem.
Ah, yes. The two flavors of accidental predication.
Can you help me wrap my head around that?
Sure. So this distinction has to do with the kinds of things that can possess certain accidental properties.
Got it.
So Penbygull argues that some accidental forms, like quantities, qualities, or changes,
Right.
require a substrate that's capable of movement or change.
Okay.
Something he calls a per se bowl
So like a physical object,
Exactly.
something that exists
in the material world.
in the material world
Yeah.
and can undergo
Transformations.
transformation.
You got it.
So this is what he calls
This is secundum modum,
formal accidental predication, secundum modum.
according to motion or change.
Okay, I'm with you so far.
Good, good.
But what about secundum habitudinem?
Ah, the other side of the coin.
What kind of properties fall under that category?
So these are accidental forms
Right.
that don't require a substrate capable of change.
Okay, so not physical objects.
Not necessarily.
What else is there?
Think of things like relations of reason, comparisons, or abstract concepts.
So things like being taller than
Yeah, that's a good one.
or being the cause of.
Exactly.
Those aren't properties
Right.
that inhere in physical objects,
Not in the same way.
the same way that color or size do.
You got it.
So these are properties that
Yeah.
can be attributed to both individuals and universals.
Because they don't depend on physical change or motion.
Okay.
They exist more in the realm of concepts and
This
relations.
is all starting to click into place.
I'm glad to hear it.
But I have to admit, thinking about identity as having degrees
Yeah.
and predication as being based on partial identity,
It's a big shift, I know.
like a pretty big shift from how I usually think about these things.
It's radical stuff, but that's what makes Penbygull so fascinating.
Yeah.
He's pushing us to question
Some of our most
fundamental assumptions.
fundamental assumptions about how we categorize and understand the world.
He's making us rethink everything.
And, even though he was working within this framework of medieval philosophy,
Yeah, way back in the day.
his ideas have a certain resonance with some of the most interesting debates
Happening right now.
happening in philosophy today.
It's all connected.
Now you're speaking my language.
I knew you'd come around.
I was thinking that.
Yeah.
Are there any modern philosophers
Oh, there are some interesting parallels.
who are picking up where Penbygull left off?
While you won't find many philosophers today directly referencing Penbygull,
Okay.
there are definitely some intriguing parallels with contemporary thought.
So who should we be reading?
For example, think about the debates surrounding essentialism versus social constructivism
Essentialists.
versus social constructivism.
Okay, so remind me what those are again.
So essentialism, in a way, echoes that traditional view of identity we talked about earlier.
Right, like the fixed category.
The idea that things have certain fixed, inherent properties that define them.
Okay, got it.
But social constructivism,
Yeah.
like Penbygull's ideas,
Suggests that categories and identities
are more fluid,
shaped by social and cultural forces.
So instead of searching for some unchanging essence,
Right.
social constructivism recognizes that things like
Gender,
gender,
race,
or even
national identity,
are constructed through our interaction
or interactions.
and the meanings we assign to them.
It's all relative.
In a way, yeah.
And this resonates with Penbygull's notion of degrees identity.
That's the connection.
He's not saying there are no essences at all,
Right.
but they're not these
A rigid
tightly things.
overlap
Overlap.
for shared properties
A more complex and nuanced understanding.
of how things relate to each other.
So instead of drawing like these hard lines between categories,
Right. The black and white thinking,
we're acknowledging them.
there can be fuzzy boundaries,
Fuzzy boundaries,
areas of overlap,
and a whole spectrum.
of ways things can be similar and different at the same time.
It's like a much more fluid and dynamic
Looking at the world.
way of looking at the world.
I like that, fluid and dynamic.
I think that's a great way to put it.
It's all about embracing the complexity
And it has implications for how we understand
of everything.
not just abstract philosophical concepts,
Right.
but also like real world issues
The stuff that matters.
like social justice, identity politics,
the big stuff.
and the very nature of truth itself.
Penbygull makes you think.
It encourages us to be more open to different perspectives
and to
the
recognize
complexity of these issues.
it's not always simple.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack.
I told you Penbygull's a heavy hitter.
You've definitely given me a lot to think about.
Good. I like to make people think.
But But before we wrap up, I
Yeah.
have to ask,
Shoot.
where can our listeners go
To learn more.
to learn more about Penbygull
Right.
and his ideas?
Good question.
His work doesn't exactly sound like
Light reading.
light reading.
No, it's pretty dense stuff.
So where can they find it?
Well, you're right. His writings aren't exactly readily available at your local bookstore.
Right.
But you can find some excellent scholarship on medieval philosophy
Okay.
that explores his ideas in more detail.
So what are we talking?
There's some great books and articles out there.
Like, what are some titles?
I can give you some recommendations.
Yeah.
And of course, there's always the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Ah, the good old Stanford Encyclopedia.
Always a reliable source.
So it has a good entry.
Yeah, a great entry on William Penbygull,
Perfect.
so your listeners can start there.
We'll make sure to link to those resources in the show notes
Excellent.
so our listeners can delve deeper
Into the world of medieval thought.
into this fascinating world of medieval thought.
It's a wild ride.
It's amazing how these deep dives always seem to lead to these unexpected connections.
Yeah, it's all connected, you know.
We start with like this niche topic,
Yeah.
like a 15th century philosopher's ideas about identity.
Right. Super specific.
And suddenly we're grappling with questions
It's a big questions.
that are still relevant today.
It's timeless, you know?
It really highlights how philosophy, even from centuries ago,
Way back when.
can still speak to our modern experiences and challenges.
Absolutely, it's still relevant.
And in Penbygull's case, I think his ideas have a particular resonance for anyone who's ever felt like
Like they don't fit in.
they don't fit neatly into a box.
You know, like you don't belong to just one category.
That's such a great point.
It's about embracing the in-between spaces.
Yeah, and it makes me think about all those times I've tried to define myself.
Right, like who am I really?
Like others.
Yeah, putting labels on people.
And it just never quite felt complete.
Never quite captures the whole picture.
Like there's always more to the story.
Right, more layers
More nuance.
than any single label can capture.
Exactly. We're more than just a label.
And that's where I think Penbygull comes in.
Penbygull's concept of degrees of identity
It's such a powerful idea.
can be so liberating.
It frees you from those rigid categories.
It allows for that complexity.
Embracing the messiness.
It acknowledges that things and people can be both similar and different,
At the same time.
connected and distinct all at the same time.
That's the beauty of it.
It's a much more fluid and forgiving way of looking at the world, isn't it?
Definitely. It's about letting go of those hard lines.
Instead of trying to force everything into these rigid categories,
The boxes?
we can embrace
The spectrum.
the messy, beautiful spectrum of existence.
I like that. Messy, beautiful spectrum.
I think that's a good one.
It's a good one.
So instead of these black and white
That's
categories,
right. The either thinking,
it's more of a,
both
Well-
and.
yeah, we can hold multiple truths at the same time.
That's a really powerful idea. And it makes me think about
What? Yeah.
not just how we see ourselves,
Right.
but also how we relate to others. Our interactions with the world.
If we can move beyond those binary,
Yeah.
all or nothing ways of thinking about identity.
Like good versus bad
Right.
or wrong.
Us versus them.
Maybe we can cultivate more
Empathy,
empathy,
understanding.
compassion.
For those who might seem different from us,
Now that's a powerful takeaway.
Penbygull's got a lot to teach us.
And it really speaks to the heart of what we're trying to do here on the deep dive.
Yeah, what's our mission here?
To explore ideas,
Even the tough ones.
even challenging ones, and see how they can help us make sense of
the world.
the world and our place in it.
Finding our place in the grand scheme of things.
It's all about expanding our
Horizons,
right?
both intellectually and
Yeah.
personally.
And who knows?
Maybe.
Maybe by grappling with these ideas from the past,
Yeah.
we can find new ways of navigating the present and shaping the future.
That's the hope, right?
I love that. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the fascinating world of William Penbygull,
What a journey.
let's leave our listeners with a final thought to ponder. Something to chew on.
If identity isn't fixed,
If it's fluid,
if it's fluid and multifaceted,
any-sided,
what does that mean for how we understand ourselves,
ourselves,
our relationships,
how we connect with each other,
and our place
in the grand scheme of things?
in the grand scheme of things?
It's a big question.
It's a question worth considering.
Definitely worth pondering.
And I encourage everyone to keep exploring, to keep asking
Those big questions
those big questions about identity,
about truth.
truth, and the nature of reality.
Never stop questioning.
You never know what surprising insights you might discover along the way.
That's the beauty of the journey.
That's the perfect note to end on.
I like it.
So to all our listeners out there,
Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the mind of William Penbygull.
He was a trip.
We hope you've come away with a new appreciation for the complexity of identity
Yeah.
and a renewed sense of wonder
About the world around us.
about the world around us. Until next time,
Happy diving.
happy diving.